First story. My wife's affair destroyed our family. I stayed for our daughters, but now they resent her, and I can't undo the damage. Hey everyone, if you love compelling stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us grow and share even more amazing tales. Now, let's dive into this wild family drama. 4 years ago, my life changed in a way I never expected. My wife, the woman I thought I knew, cheated on me. She had an affair with one of her friends, and it went on for 6 months. At the time, we had 2 daughters, 12 and 14, and we were struggling. Our debts were mounting, our finances were a constant stress, and the last thing on my mind was a divorce. So, I made the decision to stay. I stayed for them, our daughters. I swallowed my pain, put aside my anger, and stayed because I didn't want to tear our family apart. But in doing so, I gave up my health. It was a slow death inside. But I pushed through, hoping things would get better. I didn't want reconciliation. I didn't want to forgive her. I didn't want to hear her excuses or her promises to change. At first, it was easy. She tried. She went to therapy, did everything she could to make up for what she did. But the truth is, I didn't care. My heart was dead to her. I didn't feel any desire anymore. No interest in her. No interest in anyone. Over time, I realized I wasn't just indifferent to her, but to the idea of being close to anyone. It wasn't just her. My libido was gone. I had no energy for intimacy, no desire for anything outside of providing for my daughters and trying to fix the mess my life had become. I changed jobs to make more money, hoping that would help us dig ourselves out of the financial hole we were in. I was determined to get out of debt, and I worked long hours to make that happen. By the time I started seeing light at the end of the tunnel, I knew one thing for sure. I wanted a divorce. Years passed, my finances improved, I was solving the problems I could, but the damage in our marriage was irreversible. I started planning for the day I could leave her. She begged for another chance, tried to convince me we could make it work. But I didn't believe in second chances. I didn't believe cheaters change. I kept working, exercising, and focusing on my daughters. I kept my distance from my wife, emotionally, physically, and mentally. She, on the other hand, started slipping into depression. She changed jobs multiple times, went to therapy, and nothing seemed to work. But by this point, I was numb. I didn't care what she did or where she went. I was only there for the girls. I told her that repeatedly. I think she understood that. Even though we lived under the same roof, we were strangers to each other. At times, we wouldn't even cross paths. She'd leave the house, sometimes for hours, and I never bothered to ask where she was going. I didn't want to know, but here's where it gets complicated. I always thought I was protecting my daughters by staying. I didn't want them to know what had happened, but I couldn't help but feel they knew something was wrong. Over time, they started to distance themselves from their mom. They'd want to spend more time with me, cooking for them, taking them on trips, anything to keep their minds off the tension at home. I tried to balance things. I took them on trips, and then she'd take them on others. I wanted to make sure they didn't feel caught in the middle, but eventually I noticed a shift. They didn't want to be with her as much. They started resenting her. I don't know if she told them what had happened, but I'm pretty sure she didn't. They never asked me about it, and I never told them. But they knew. She tried to buy their affection with gifts, but it didn't work as they got older. Our daughters, despite their intelligence, kindness, and athletic ability, started becoming cold. It's like they built walls around themselves. They were emotionally distant, like me. I realized they'd started mirroring me, my indifference, my coldness. I could see it in the way they acted, in the way they handled situations. They had the right intentions, but they'd put up barriers to protect themselves. I couldn't blame them. I was distant, and they were just reflecting what they saw. My younger daughter has a fiery temper, impatient with everything, while my older one is laser-focused on money and her athletic pursuits. Both of them are strong, driven, but in a way that makes them appear unemotional. Then came my promotion. I shared the news with them, and their response was immediate. They wanted more things, more trips, more everything. My wife took this as a sign that we could reconnect. She kept trying, over and over, despite me telling her we were done. But I didn't want her. I never asked her to stay. She stayed because she couldn't bear to leave. But I didn't care. Here's the crux of it all. If we divorce, I know the girls will want to stay with me. They don't listen to her anymore. They don't seem to care about what she says or does. They're already leaning on me more and more. But now I'm worried. I don't want them to hate their mom. I don't want them to resent her for what happened. But I see the damage now. We've been keeping up a facade for so long, and it's clear that it wasn't just hurting us. It's hurting them too. I didn't want to hurt them. I didn't want them to feel the tension between us. But staying for them, pretending everything was okay, was the worst decision I could have made. Now I can't undo the damage, and I can't protect them from the reality of our situation. I just hope, somehow, they'll be okay. Second story. AITA for refusing to go to my mother-in-law's house for late dinners, after it's disrupting my toddler's routine and causing tension with my husband. I need to get something off my chest. My mother-in-law, Nel, has recently moved back to our hometown after leaving her toxic ex, and my husband and I were completely blindsided by the severity of what she'd been going through. She kept it all hidden from us, and now my husband feels incredibly guilty because he didn't realize just how bad things were for her. She's finally free, though. She's got her own little apartment now and is working on rebuilding her life. We've tried to help her as much as we can, but we're struggling financially, so it's been tough to offer the kind of support she might need. Now, here's where things start to get complicated. For the past few weeks, my Mael has invited us over for dinner several times a week. She's always loved to cook, and she says she's excited to cook for family again, especially because she gets to spend time with our toddler. Sounds nice, right? But there's a big catch. Every time, she asks us to come over around 6 p.m., but dinner is never ready until 9 p.m. or later. And on top of that, she refuses to let anyone help her in the kitchen. We've ended up staying way past our toddler's bedtime, and it's wreaking havoc on her nighttime routine. I don't know if you've ever tried to get a toddler to bed after they've been thrown off their schedule, but let me tell you, it's a nightmare. She gets cranky, frustrated, and it takes so much longer to get her down. It's stressful for all of us, but especially for her. I've tried talking to my Mel about it, but as soon as I bring it up, she shuts me down. She's been critical of me and my parenting style from day one. She thinks it's ridiculous that I keep such a strict schedule for my daughter. She always tells me that when her kids were little, they didn't have any kind of routine. They ate when they were hungry and fell asleep when they were tired, and somehow it all worked out just fine. I get that that worked for her, but it's not working for us. So I asked my husband to step in and talk to her about it. Maybe I thought, if he talks to her, she'll listen. But no, she basically said the same thing to him, that it's no big deal, and that I should relax. Then she went off on him about how she's just trying to help us out by providing some meals, and how terrible it was for us to make her feel bad for wanting to spend time with family. That was the last straw for him, and he dropped it. We've been back to her place for dinner a couple more times since then, and it's still the same. Dinner's not ready until 9 p.m., and she's made more passive-aggressive comments about me needing to loosen up and not expecting everyone to follow my schedule. It's starting to feel like a battle of wills. My husband says we just need to put up with it because of everything she's been through. He feels guilty that he didn't realize the extent of her situation, and he thinks we should give her some leeway while she's getting back on her feet. But here's the thing. I don't want to keep doing this. I don't want to keep going over to her place, sitting around waiting for dinner, and watching my daughter fall apart because it's way past her bedtime. It's too much. After another critical phone call from her yesterday, I finally had enough. I told my husband I didn't want to go to her apartment for dinner anymore. I said that maybe she could come over to our place every now and then, but I wasn't going to keep putting myself and my daughter through this. My husband got upset and said we should be more understanding. She's been through so much, and he's partially responsible because he didn't know how bad things were. But I just feel like I'm being asked to sacrifice my peace of mind and my daughter's well-being for the sake of his mom's guilt trip. We didn't really come to an agreement. I'm sitting here wondering if I'm being too harsh. Should I just suck it up and keep going along with it for the sake of my husband and his mom? Or am I justified in setting these boundaries? Reddit, AITA for not wanting to go to my Meal's house for dinner anymore? Third story. My mom betrayed my dad multiple times, and I was stuck in the middle of their affair drama while trying to protect my family. I'm going to take you back to a time when my life felt like it was falling apart, all because of one betrayal I couldn't ignore anymore. Imagine being stuck in the middle of your parents' tangled mess, with your world shifting beneath your feet and your trust shattered. That's where I found myself. For a bit of background, I'm 16, and I live with my mom and older brother, who's 18, while my dad works away during the week. He only comes home on the weekends, so it's just us and my mom most of the time. Things haven't been normal for a while. But it all started about 3 years ago when I first found out my dad suspected my mom of having an affair. At the time, I didn't fully understand why my dad was so suspicious. He found a man's name in my mom's phone, except it wasn't a man's name anymore. She'd changed it to a woman's name, a work colleague she'd talked about before. When my dad confronted her, it blew up, but they both promised to work through it. I was hopeful at first, thinking maybe they could make it work. But as time passed, my dad put in all this effort to fix their relationship, calling her more, planning more trips together when he was home. But my mom? She didn't change at all. I couldn't look at her the same way anymore. I've always been a daddy's girl, and seeing him trying so hard while she seemed indifferent was hard to handle. I began to question everything. I felt betrayed by her, and from that moment on, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more going on. Then last October, my brother and I stumbled across something we were never supposed to see. It was a string of text messages between my mom and her boss, a man who was married with a kid in my year at school. I'm not proud of the fact that we snooped, but what we found was shocking. The messages were intimate and filled with things that made my stomach churn. I felt like the weight of the world was crashing down on me. My dad had no idea. And after everything that had happened with her changing the man's name and all the promises they'd made to each other, I felt sick for my dad. I didn't even have to say anything. My brother and I were both certain this would be the thing that would finally end their marriage. We told my dad, and he lost it. He showed up at the guy's house, had a fight with him, and then told his wife about the affair. It was a mess. My mom tried to manipulate my dad into thinking it was all his fault, and somehow, ridiculously, he started to believe her. I told him over and over that he should leave her, but of course he didn't listen. He didn't want to believe the truth. But then, things took another dark turn. It happened again. I caught my mom texting the same guy, this time on her work phone. It was while my dad was away on a work trip, and I can't even describe how much that hurt. I don't know what went on between them, but what I do know is that I couldn't sit back and let it happen again. This time, I took matters into my own hands. I didn't want to tell my brother right away. I didn't want him involved in this mess, especially if it ended up hurting him. So, while I was at school, I sent a message to both my mom and her boss. I told them they had one choice: tell their partners about the affair, or I would. That night, when I got home, they both confronted me. They begged me not to tell anyone, asking me to keep their secret so their families wouldn't fall apart. I won't lie, it was a tough decision. I thought about what it would do to my dad, how he'd never trust her again, and how I might lose my mom for good. But at the same time, I couldn't just ignore what she was doing. In the end, I chose not to tell my dad. I told my mom, though, that if this ever happened again, I wouldn't protect her anymore. I would walk away, and I wouldn't speak to her. It felt selfish, but it was the first time in a long while that she actually seemed to appreciate me. She thanked me, and it was the nicest I'd felt from her in years. It felt good, but at the same time, I knew it wasn't right. I thought that was the end of it. But last weekend, my mom and I went away for a trip. I caught her texting someone again, but this time she quickly turned the phone away from me. The name she had in her phone was Liam, another guy from work. But I recognized the profile picture, and my stomach dropped. It was the same guy, the one she'd been texting before. When she fell asleep, I didn't hesitate. I searched his name on her phone and found what I dreaded. She had changed his name, just like before, and they'd been talking again. But this time, the messages were gone. She had deleted everything. I'm at a loss now. Should I tell my dad, even though I know it will shatter their marriage for good? Should I confront my mom and tell her I know everything? Or should I just walk away from the whole situation and let them figure it out on their own? I don't know what to do anymore. I'm tired of being stuck in the middle. I don't want to hurt my dad more, but at the same time I can't let my mom keep doing this. I'm just a kid, but I'm living in a nightmare I can't wake up from. So, I'm reaching out for advice. What should I do next?